Good afternoon, viewers and listeners. You're tuned in to the news behind the news with Ralph Cantava on Mix 94.7 FM. And today we're going to have a very special conversation. This interview is one that was requested by a couple people actually who wanted, to hear one of our local professionals talk about mental health and wellness and so forth. And I thought of the perfect person to to invite. And that person is Dr. Tasheena Maccow-Thomas, who was a former director of NEPA, well-known psychologist on the island, also the owner of Tizan Health and Wellness Center, and now current director of Turning Point. So good afternoon to you, and welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cantav. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you again for accepting the invitation. I would like to start off with a little history. And this one will be quite some history because what's interesting is that you hail from the French side, but more so Colombier, which is, that area of St. Martin that so many of us love. And we're aware that Colombier is this pastoral, peaceful, very culturally rich island on St. Martin. And I know that you carry a lot of that with you growing up with your grandmother and so forth.
Great-grandmother, yes.
Yeah, your great-grandmother, yes. So could you tell us about your upbringing in Colombier, and we continue from there.
Yes. Well, I could say, looking at me now, I embrace, my childhood as a child. I was free. I was in a hill. I actually, it's so strange because whenever someone would come by my mom, I will take the opportunity to hit the back door to then go in the hills, get my friends, and then we go in the hill. We actually had we had a house that was built in a kenep tree. So we had a tree house. And so that was our getaway spot, But one of the things that I loved growing up was that my great-grandmother, so I was raised in a yard with my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother. So my great-grandmother got the opportunity to know her fifth generation. And so that was beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah, that was beautiful. So I'm the fourth. My children are fifth, right? So before she passed away, she saw them. She passed away at the age of 97. So the same month that she would have been 98, she passed away. But I could say that I've learned a lot from her in terms of herb, in terms of our culture. And so, when we hear what is our culture today, for me, it's like, that's not my culture. That's not what my grandmother taught me, So I can recall the day eating arrowroot porridge and the days of eating farine. Now you tell people farine, they're like, farine, what are you talking about?
Farine is like flour?
So farine is like she used to make farine porridge for us. So it's like not like flour. It's like can't remember the texture. I could remember the texture. I just can't remember what it was made of. Whether it was cassava. I think some cassava was in there as well. But we ate farine, and then she would do cassava bread. We had cocoa tea in the morning. We had fresh cow milk, and so she would make it with cinnamon and stuff like that. So I remember smelling all these things. Sometimes you're still asleep, but the scent of those things wake you up,
Can you imagine?
wake you up from sleeping, bush tea. And so even before she passed away, I could recall us going to Leicester to pick guava berry. And she was 83 years old at that point, and she went on a hill to pick guava berry.
Wow.
Okay, and so I live with those tangible moments. I remember her, and for me, those dishes and those breakfasts and all of those things, I still do them because for me, our culture is our identity. Our culture is something that is valuable. And so I feel like I'm happy today that she passed it on to me, that I'll be able to pass it on, of course, to my children. Yeah. And so far, they love it, And we need to promote more of our culture.
Yes, indeed.
And one of the things that stood out to me as a child was that in that little village called Colombier, unity. So they will prepare stuff. So if my grandmother butcher today, then the people that her friends, they would get whatever. And so if they do anything, they would call her and say, send your grandchildren, and we would pick it up for them, for her, and bring it back. But then they live long. I know persons live 101, 98. They live long. And so that was a beautiful thing to see, whereas today we hardly see those things.
Yeah.
You know, we see there's but hardly, you know. But in our community, that was a normal thing to live up to 98, 100 and stuff like that.
Yeah. But then it was, you know, one of the interesting things I always tell people or say is that when you look at the way in which colonialization took place, you know, one of the terms Europeans often use was like, we have to civilize these people, you know, they were savages and so forth. But look at how, even how ancient societies live with such peace and with nature.
Yeah.
You know, everything they did was in harmony. And you even see here, when we look at St. Martin's past, you mentioned the word unities, that communal aspect which was so strong, and the fact that, yeah, just even in terms of people's livelihood, in terms of their health, it was intact.
It was.
So now you have where I think they say we are much more civilized, much more intelligent, but in some of the decisions we make, some of the things you see exist in the world are so regressive, you know, but I guess in the name of convenience or capitalism, so...
We are much more civilized, but we are not much more healthy. And so for me, there's where I draw the line. It's like, and another thing, Mr. Kantav, is that when it comes on embracing our culture, I find that we don't. And it's not that we don't want, but I think that because our culture was not passed on to generation, we kind of lose.
There's like a block.
Yeah. And so some of the things, so it's what I see in St. Martin is that we have embraced everybody else's culture and we have neglected ours to some extent. And I could recall going to school. I had this English teacher, and she's from French Quarter, local teacher, and she refused. And her because we did English and, of course, English history with her and St. Martin history, and she refused to teach us about Christopher Columbus, and she refused to say that chicken leg and Johnny cake was our cultural dish. And I could recall at that point, I was like, you know, it's true, because as a child growing up, Ralph, I didn't know chicken leg and Johnny cake. I know my grandmother. If you will ask me, I would tell you my grandmother would prepare rice and peas and fry fish and plantain, or it will be fish and provision, and you know, and or fish and cornmeal and stuff like that. But I don't recall ever, you know. And so I think that there's a lot of error and where the things that we call our culture in reality,
like so-called, you know, it's like our traditions kind of get lost in the sauce, you would say. It's like we adopted the Coca-Colas and the foreign soft drinks, and we put aside fresh lime, you know, lime juice.
But then we saw what happened,
and so forth. Yeah.
And so from the moment that we derived from our culture, we saw where disease start hitting our body left, right, and center, because now you stray from what originally was good for you, and you took on something different. And so even with drinking tisane, for instance, our grandparents, you know that going back to school, you would have to drink tisane, you would have to purge and stuff like that. As much as you don't like it, you know, but we were good.
Yeah.
We were good. And so something happened there. And so that's why today I love my culture. I can recall when I was working at St. Martin Academy, there was this one teacher, and she came to me and she said, something is different about you. She said, I always try to understand St. Martin culture, and people will say St. Martin have no culture. I said, well, ridiculous. I don't know who tell you that. But as for me, I have a culture that I embrace very much. And so I will prepare some dishes as well at times, and I will, you know, bring for her. And even bake. I would bake and I would take things to her, and she would be like, wow, and you know, and stuff. Because our grandparents did that. They had guava berry punch, they had pumpsy red punch, they had pumpsy tail punch, which is golden apple. They had, they had all these things. And so for me, it was beautiful. And so what happened? Why we didn't continue with this, you know?
Yeah. But I'm glad that even for you, you know, you mentioned that as something you definitely, not even enforce, but you just practice at home so that your children know it too. Because another part of, you know, is cultural, or let's say wisdom and know-how. Because yes, what society changes, certain processes or things that we do improve, but then there are some things that just work, period.
Yeah.
You know, for example, growing up in town, I always tell people I never knew what a hospital was like, you know, what like going to the doctor for different things. Besides the various herbs that my mother would use to, treat any of us if we had any this illness, whatever. One of the main things is, for example, go to the beach. You know, you have a fever, you got a cold, just go to the beach. You don't need no Tylenol or whatever. Just go to the beach, go several days, and you end up feeling better.
Well, and definitely. And so those are all things that they did and that work for us. It's not that they didn't work. They work. And so it's like, you know, what happened? I could recall, my grandfather is a fisherman. So my father, well-known fisherman from St. James, Mr. Manny. And so it's, you know, fish that we don't we don't know, we didn't eat or, you know. And my grandfather did that. It's just in the last 4 or 5 years, he's not on his boat out in the ocean anymore. You're talking about a man who is supposed to be going to his 90s, or if not there already. And one of the things I can recall is that he will, in the morning, like if he feel like the fluid's coming out, he will go out to the ocean, he get his bottle of water from the ocean, he will drink it. And that was a way of purifying his system. So they did so many things that work for them. And whereas now, we're looking down on this very thing that worked for them. So you could see the brainwashing of our whole systems. I'm going to put it that way.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the things I would like to dwell on and then continue is what was it like for you then in general growing up on the French side, and how do you see that experience looking at how we over here tend to function? Because I guess one of the criticisms or more one of the things we observe, I find, is that, you know, we always say, like, boy, you know, we over here, we're not as united as you guys. We're not as, you know, like, that St. Martin identity, I would say, is not as strong. We all one island, but then you definitely still see a divide. And, of course, one of the main things we always big y'all up for, even though sometimes people complain about it, is when it's time to protest. So what can you share on that?
Well, you know, one thing I noticed with the people on the French side, Rav, don't matter how divided they are, if they got to come together, to fight against something that is common, they will. Okay? I think in terms of culture, how to put it, I think on that part of the island, persons more practice culture. Like, for instance, if you come to Colombier, you will have, like, for instance, the arrowroot jollification. You will have, speaking about Colombier, you will have the ram goat contest. You will have, in Grancas, they will have different things as well. So persons always promote their culture there. And I'm not sure, but I think as well on the French side have more, I will say, more older, more elderly locals, for instance, that still practice and still, like, for instance, I have a friend, Natasha, and her grandmother had the almond sugar cake, and that lady, she was known for that. She did it for many, many, many years. And so I think, of course, now they still do it and stuff like that, but she did that. So you could have go Grancas and you knew where to go for that. You could have go for Mobby. You could have go for different things. So I think...
You said something very interesting there. Sorry, because, I mean, probably it's your observation, but definitely something worth looking into. Because, yeah, you know, it's like, your elders, your seniors are your knowledge banks.
Of course.
You know, we have people who've passed, and we were like, man, this is the person who'll tell you about anything and everything about St. Martin. Or they're like, you know, your living Wikipedias.
Yeah.
So that is...
I think, and like, I think like in the last 2 to 3 years is when we started really seeing our elderlies dying out and stuff like that on the French side. But I could say for the most part of it, they were there up until the 2000s. And so you could have gone, you could have asked them information. I can recall days that persons came to interview my grandmother. And she would speak about in her days what it was growing up and picking her fruits and killing her chicken and coming over St. Peter's Hill to sell them.
Wow.
And so they call her the Iron Woman because from 5 o'clock in the morning, she will be up and she will be coming home later in the afternoon and, of course, preparing still for your children and stuff like that. And so though they work harder, they were able to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Yeah. So by them walking those long hours was a type of exercise for them, right?
True.
And then
Serious cardio.
yeah,
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 go up a
yeah.
hill.
And
go
and
down, yeah.
yeah. So for instance, for me, it's like the little thing that we are taking for granted is like they didn't even have half of the things that we have, but they still were happy. I could never recall seeing my grandmother frustrated or never. She was just always this quiet lady, contented with whatever she had. And so I realized when we worry today, they worship God. Life could be hard for them, and you would hear them singing some hymn, whereas we will be worrying. And so I miss those moments.
Yeah, I understand.
I miss those
another
moments.
thing you say, which this is when I say a common thread, because I've interviewed a lot of seniors, right? And all of them would always say, while things were hard, we were happy.
Yeah.
I find that so, in a sense, it's so I'm saying interesting, but it's beyond interesting.
Yeah.
So many seniors have said, okay, things were hard, things were different at St. Martin, but we were happy.
They were.
And so now it's like, okay, now we were able to maybe build bigger houses. We can get certain jobs, or we have certain pleasures available to us. But how happy is St. Martin right now?
And then you notice a lot of, like, for instance, if you look at persons now, we have a lot of persons on St. Martin suffering, like, for instance, with circulation. You rarely heard that back then because they walk so much. They walk so much, and they work hard. I can recall my grandmother used to do her own cold keel.
What's that?
So the cold keel is what they do. The cold,
okay.
Yeah. So she would have her own cold keel, and then sometimes when she don't feel like making it. For instance, there was a lady that lived further up. I mean, she passed away a couple of years ago. She would tell us, okay, go by her and tell her your grandmother says so. And I noticed that when she sent us to by the lady to collect whatever, she will never pay, but they will trade amongst themselves. And so if she had cassava or cassava bread, she will send for the lady, and the lady will send the coal for her. And that's what they did. They trade.
Communal enrichment.
Yes, they did that. And so there was this lady as well that I would always go by, Miss Veronica, and she would always send certain things for my grandmother, and my grandmother would always send meat and different things for her. And it was so beautiful because though she was a little older, my grandmother would literally con the meat before she sent it to her. And so they live with such a unity.
What do you mean by that?
Con the meat. People don't con meat anymore, but our grandparents con meat. So what they will do, they will take the meat, put salt, use the salt, and they put it in the sun to dry. And so that was a way of preserving the meat, because at that point, some had fridge and some didn't have fridge. I know my grandmother with a kerosene fridge and a goose. And so those are things that she still had in her house.
And the goose is basically iron.
Exactly.
As saying so, just even I know, because some people wouldn't know.
Yeah, and so people would call a patty. My grandmother would say, go get my pail for me. So those are the things, and when I would go in, I would take it for her. So conning, come back to your question, conning meat was a way of preserving the meat, but that was also a way of removing bacteria from the meat. So they would con fish as well. Yeah, they will con their fish. They will con meat. I know what it is to eat roast fish. My grandfather did that. So he would come out from the sea, salt the fish, put them in a big bad pan of water, put them on the fire just like that with a scale and everything, and we would just eat it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I had where my grandmother was into herbs, known everything about herbs and practiced her culture. And then I had a grandfather who literally lived on the sea. So I had a little bit of both worlds.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I said I've also looking at my upbringing. Like my mom and dad really like that. They come from a farming, let's say, family. The grandparents in Haiti, own huge estates and stuff. But interestingly, like I never really grew up like, let's say, with understanding seafood. We don't eat fish and so forth because my parents were mountain people. So it's more like goats and chicken and so forth.
Yeah.
But it's interesting listening to what you said too, because I think there definitely now is more of a not just appreciation but desire for a lot of young smart people, even adults, to want to get back to that knowledge, understanding, and how things were. Because yeah, we see our society progress. We can say, okay, we've made more money and all of that, but going back to the underlying thing, are we happy? Are we healthy? Are we respecting each other? Are we a society that has morals and values?
Yeah. And then back then what we saw was that this thing, we say it, but it's so true. What we saw back then was it took a village to raise a child.
Yes.
Whereas we're not seeing that anymore because of course of different reasons. We have a lot more mixtures and different things like that. But I could recall where before I was miserable as a child. I was miserable. And so before I can do anything, my grandmother already get the call. Or before I get home, before I reach home, I probably don't get a map or something from somebody,
Faster than WhatsApp.
We said?
Faster than WhatsApp.
Exactly. And so it was like, you're looking back at those times and you're like, wow, the power that it takes to be community-minded. And that they had, they were community-minded. My mother's house built from jollification, Ralph, where everybody, uncle, cousins, everybody get together and they build. They build for each other. And so those days are far gone. But I enjoy being coming up in those days. I enjoy especially where I was born and raised, and that is Colombier. My neighbor's string is there. Yes.
Got you. That's beautiful. So part of the main reason I also brought you on is because you're a health expert, you're a psychologist, and we're living in a time where for the last couple of years,
social work.
Oh,
30. Yeah.
Okay.
So specialized. I have a specialization there, but yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So for one, what inspired you to study your to go into that field, and can you specify your study as well?
Yeah. It's so strange, Ralph, because I started out in the medical field. Yeah, I started out in the medical field and working in a hospital. I was always drawn to elderlies. Why? Because born, raised with your great-grandmother, your grandmother, everybody is in one yard. And so, they say, if you're amongst the older person, you get more wisdom.
True.
And so for some reason, whenever a client will come into the hospital and they were older, I would be more drawn to them. And so sometimes you hear them speak and you hear the things that they will be going through, the problems, the challenges and stuff like that. And then one day I could recall I was speaking to this lady that I knew pretty well, and she didn't have any children. But the person that she was staying by was literally abusing her. So when she was admitted that day, she literally had marks from a cigarette all over her.
Wow.
And so I was speaking to her. We had a conversation and stuff like that. And she was like, you better make children, because don't leave what happened to me happen to you, and, and stuff like that. And something stood out to me. And that was like, because I'm somebody, I have a lot of compassion. And I say, maybe I need to change field. Maybe I need to go more in a field where you care and you help people, persons and stuff like that. And I left the hospital. And one of the reasons why I left the hospital too, because just then I got pregnant with my daughter, with Tasheena, and it was like, shift, no. So I was like, okay, then this gave me the opportunity to go back and finish up and stuff like that. And so when I went back to study, it was a whole different thing. I did social work and psychology, which had nothing to do with nursing. Well, in certain areas, of course, you're still caring for persons.
But nursing was your first field.
And so I did that. I came back, I work. And then a couple of years after, I went back and that's why I got my doctorate in heavy drug addiction. And my master probably could have been in heavy drug addiction too, because at one point that's what I was thinking. But then I was like, I need to understand the foundation and the basics of social work and psychology and stuff like that. And I say, okay, well, maybe one day I will do my doctorate. And so while speaking to my husband and stuff like that about it, he encouraged me. He's like, you should, because it's something that I always wanted to do. Because my mom was a single mom, because my dad was on drugs. And so I always wanted, to understand, the way. And then one day I had a conversation with my dad, and it was very simple and stuff like that. And I was like, I forgive you for not being there, but I still have a question though. Why? And sitting with him and everything, he expressed certain things to me, and I realized that the foundation of it was rejection. And so I always thought about it, and I'm like, okay. Because most of the time, Ralph, when we hear about addiction, we're thinking, okay, addiction. And so we focus on addiction, and even in certain rehabilitation centers, they focus on addiction. But there's where I learned that you just don't focus on addiction. You got to go to the root. And the root is most of the time who abandoned you, who molested you, who rejected you, who told you that you wouldn't be anything. Because sometimes we speak things into person's life, not realizing that it manifests itself. And so there's where I went back and I said, okay, I'm going to go and study heavy drug addiction. And I did it. And so my passion, and I mean, my husband, my family could tell you, when sometimes persons will see them, they will chase, and they will like chastise them or tell them get from
them. Yeah.
Not you. No. I would get them something to eat. Or sometimes if I already give them money, I would say, don't come back here, I just give you money, and stuff like that. But there is a compassion for them because addiction is not just an addiction. Something led to it. So addiction is never a cause, but it's always a consequence. So it's a plaster on the sore.
And it affects the society as well, as it affects the household and the individual. So
addiction is not just, a mental or a physical thing. Addiction becomes a social issue because then once you're addicted, you cannot pay your rent, of course, because at that point you're so addicted. There's that wanting, there is that yearning. And so you always want the drugs. And so you neglect the things that you need to do so you can maintain your bad habit. And so it becomes a social issue.
Indeed.
Because they end up on the street. And once they end up on the street, then they become a nuisance to the community.
Yeah, and become which is a danger to themselves and everyone else.
Yeah. And so one thing with addiction is that it always made you think that you have control over the substance. And over the emotion of that craving.
It's a veiled belief.
It takes you over.
Yeah.
Because it has the ability to tap into your spirituality, which changes everything.
So on that note, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. You're tuned into the news behind the news on Mix 94.7 FM. And this afternoon, I am joined with Dr. Tasheena Maccow-Thomas, the current director of Turning Point, Drug and Rehabilitation Center, as well as the owner of Tizan Health and Wellness Center. So we last left off on, basically the destructive power that drugs have on persons who are addicted to it. And one of the things I was curious about is now that, particularly, that you're the director of Turning Point, what are the types of substances you realize people are usually addicted to, or that is even easily available on our island?
Well, all drugs is easily available on our island. That's the sad part. However, I'm going to tell you marijuana, those that persons use and that are more common to St. Martin will be marijuana, crack, cocaine, and of course, alcohol. We forget alcohol, but alcohol is a drug as well.
True, yes.
And then recently, some pills.
So you have like Oxy or
fentanyl and those.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So one of the things you mentioned usually causes a debate. People say marijuana is not a drug, and people will say, well, it's a herb.
Listen, Ralph.
So what is your take on
anything that has the ability to change you or change anything that has the ability to change who you are is a drug. Literally.
Well said. Okay. Yeah, because it alters your mental state, your ability to control
your mental state, your spiritual state, your emotional state. And then, of course, like we say, drug in general, of course, we will have to deal with a social issue. Yeah. And so when we look at, and most often persons who are on drugs are in a denial state. So they don't see that, okay, by using this, it will lead to this. They don't see it until many years after.
And I guess another thing I would add too, now this is a discussion I've had with some persons I know who would smoke weed, is like, can you do without it? It's like, okay, you may say it's not a drug, but can you do without it? And sometimes usually the answer is no. So I'm like, don't you think then it's you're addicted to it? If you're addicted to it, it's probably, you might label it a drug. You can say it's a plant, but you wouldn't smoke no other type of plant.
Your body has already gotten accustomed of having that substance. And so now your whole mood and your behaviors are literally changed because of that, of what you're putting in. So if you're not putting it any longer in the body, then there is a craving and there is a want. So you find yourself going back. But at that point, you're already addicted. Yeah? It's like a medication. The doctor puts you on a medication and he say, okay, you have to be on this medication for the rest of your life. Once you don't take the medication for a day or two, you start to feel edgy. Because I didn't take it today, but it's the same thing. Because your body, your organs, everything now has gotten accustomed of having that the substance.
Yeah, and it's like one of the other things too that persons are now highlighting, particularly now, is sugar and the addictive powers of sugar as well, which tends to be very strong because that leads to, of course, a plethora of illnesses, diseases in the body.
And the cravings as well, because when we see certain cravings, we need to understand what's happening in the body. I'm just going to give you an example. When we see, for instance, depression, persons who are depressed tend to crave sweet food and oily food because it is your food has the ability to change your mood. Because food are just not food. Your food has the ability to change your mood. And so when we look at, for instance, our serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, our serotonin is released, of course, the substance is released in our bodies. And so what happens is that when we are depressed, there's a certain craving because your serotonin is not releasing the same amount of substance. So there's a craving to eat certain food. You always want to eat, and you want to isolate yourself. Monitor somebody who's depressed. They put on weight. The flip side to that is you see some who don't want to eat, but they still want that sweet.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So one of the things I would like to get into now is definitely a discussion on mental health, but still, I guess, continue a bit on drug addiction and so forth. But first off, can you describe basically how has it been now that you're the director of Turning Point? What were the responsibilities you were faced with coming in, and what does Turning Point do, for those who may not know?
Okay. For Turning Point is a drug and rehabilitation center in which we basically, we work with addicts. So addicts come into Turning Point. Prior to that, we were subsidized from VSA. So VSA will deal with the volunteers. So someone say, hey, I can't cope with life. I'm having addictions. I want to come into Turning Point. Then our doors will be open. And so when that subsidy got cut, then it was mainly justice. So we also deal with clients coming from SGIB or straight from through the court, for instance. So they are civil mandated and to Turning Point. So that means to say the program is a 1-year program. The judge rules, she sends her decree that they have to come into Turning Point for a year, and there's where we take them in.
But so just to clarify then, so at present, let's say...
There's no volunteer program.
So anyone who recognizes, hey, I have a drug addiction problem, I can't come to Turning Point and receive it.
No, but I will sit with them and I will say, hey, listen, I will tell the family, it's really becoming uncontrollable, do this. Find a lawyer, let the lawyer write up a letter for you, and then send it to the court.
So the court
so the judge can have the client be mandated into Turning Point.
So I guess can you share a bit on I guess discussions you've had with the Ministry of VSA to get back that funding to allow for
but recently
voluntary.
we were in communication to see if we could get back those funding, and so we're still waiting.
Okay.
But in the meanwhile, Turning Point continues to work because it's something that is plaguing our community.
And have you, sorry, cutting you out, have you noticed, has it been an increase in persons?
Definitely. We had an increase after the hurricane, and then now we have even more of an increase after the pandemic because persons lost their jobs. Yeah, you have persons lost their jobs. But what we are also seeing is an increase in youngsters using marijuana as well. So we have where the schools are calling and wanting to have a conversation with us as well.
How young?
Very young, like from 12, 13. So last week I had one, he was only 13 years old. Yeah. And then, of course, the high schools. And so it's like, how can we come together and strategize? When I first came into Turning Point, one of the things that I wanted to do was prevention right away, because I believe the earlier you can get them, the earlier you could bring that awareness, then we'll automatically save them.
Yeah, as we say, prevention is better than cure.
Prevention is better than cure. And so I came in with, hey, we gotta go into the schools, but of course on our end we had to plan how are we going into the schools. Yeah, and so in a couple of weeks from now, you will see us going into the school. What we did was something awesome. We met with the police academy, and they did like a whole day of training with us. So they had to put together their PowerPoint and go into the schools, and in which it already started, which was very good because the students, and I think they did it for the elementary school. So the students saw someone, an authority with their uniform, bringing across this information. So that was awesome.
Interesting. So one of the things I'd like to, if you could give some tips or advice on is families, for persons who, have a family member who's addicted to drugs or alcohol, or even gambling, for example. How do they cope? What would you
First
recommend?
of all, I will tell that person, take your family member to see a psychologist, a social worker, or a counselor. Why? Because, Ralph, whenever we see addiction, there is a problem. Something has led to the addiction. And so I will say at that point, hey, let the person see a psychologist, let them speak out, let's see what's the problem. Maybe counseling can work. Probably not. The person probably need more intervention. And at that point, then they could contact Turning Point. We could have a conversation. We could even have a family intervention. And then from there, we decide, hey, this person really can't help themselves. They need to be admitted into Turning Point. And so the process starts there. Then the family find a lawyer. The lawyer goes to the court, make sure that the judge approved it, send the decree to Turning Point, and then Turning Point take in the person. Okay.
And so while, of course, you're dealing with this high influx of persons, what is your vision, basically? What are some of the things you hope to achieve now that you're director of the foundation?
Okay. One of the thing that I hope to achieve as director of Turning Point, of course, is to see a decrease in substance use in our community. Yeah. And like I said earlier, that would be going into the school. I believe the earlier you could catch the child and bring that level of awareness, then we know that this is a soul that we win, of course, and speak out about drugs. Not that it's so taboo in our community, like everything. Yeah. That we can go and we could not look down on those people and not stigmatize them and this stigma. Whereas, he was on drugs, okay, so he can't get a job here and stuff like that. And hence the reason why before our clients leave Turning Point, we help them find jobs. So right now we have about 5 of them that are out and they're working.
Nice.
Okay. And so we did that because it's a way of, the old people say idle hand. What is the saying?
Basically, idle hands are devil's play. No, idle minds is, let me Google it.
Idle something.
Yeah, I know you're saying.
Yeah, so we don't want that because once they're bored, that could also be a trigger. So triggers are not only environmental or sense or friends and stuff like that. No, that could be a trigger as well because you're going back home to do nothing. So we don't want that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just Google it. So idle hands are the devil's playthings.
Yes, that.
I know there's another one, but I don't mind.
There is another one.
But I get the essence.
Yeah.
Of what
So
you're
we
saying,
don't want that. We want that when they go back into the community that they feel a part of the community and not literally feeling like my past, but feeling like, listen, I cleaned up myself, and now it's
renewed. Yeah.
Time for me to be reintegrated back into the society in a positive way, of course. Yeah. And so and we as a people need to help them. So we need to encourage them. We need to look up to them, not look down on them, and remind them of their past, because I've seen that as well.
Yeah. And another thing too is that it can happen to anyone.
It can happen to anyone.
Because, it is not just it doesn't just affect various social classes. It doesn't just affect the lower class and middle class. It affects everyone. And it can affect anyone, and it has affected everyone in some way.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. And sometimes, sometimes we don't realize how important this topic is until it hit home. Because if you don't know, then, you just don't know. But once you know, and you have to deal with the person on a daily basis, you will see the difference. Yeah. And even in that, your approach should never be hate or frustration and stuff like that. The Bible says love covers the multitude of sin, right? So you should be compassionate. You should love them out. So you don't hate them out. You hate them in, but you love them out of that situation. So you still support them. And of course, it will get hard. But you cannot do it. Hey, you support them and make sure that they checked into some institution to get help.
And seek resources available.
Yeah. One of the things, and you asked earlier, one of the things I'm seeing as well is an increase of, prior to everything, you will have someone coming in with drug addiction. Now you're having them dually diagnosed. So drug addiction and mental illness. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So then, and that is two different things.
And it's two different things. And there's where we work closely with the Mental Health Foundation, because they may need to be, sometimes they are the Mental Health Foundation's client and who are still struggling with addiction. And so we work together as a team where one part is taking care of this and the other part is taking care.
My question then is everyone who's addicted to drugs, is it due to a mental illness, or can you, I guess? Not all
the time. Not all the time. And the recent what we're seeing is that indeed they're coming in with dual diagnosis.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I can imagine, the challenges. I was earlier just speaking to someone saying, we look at the costs. That's the cost of the impact of Irma and COVID, as far as persons losing their jobs, rise in food products, bills, and so forth. But that mental cost is huge. And small, but it's very huge.
It is.
Because I think we can definitely even see it, even on the roads where...
and every day there's someone new. And so for me, I think though it's... I think right now what I'm seeing is an increase definitely on the front side. In the morning coming to work, I literally see it. And you could see them on the road. Yeah. And for me, that is like, whoa, what are we doing as a nation? We could promote tourism. We could promote all these nice things. But what are we doing for our people here? What are we putting in place to ensure that our people prosper, that our people's mental health are covered? And so those are the things, because we could and I mean, having tourists come to our island again, Ralph, don't get me wrong, is something beautiful. But what are they... What is happening to the people here in St. Martin? Are they being neglected? And so for me, it's like, bittersweet.
Yeah, I guess what you're saying, indeed. The next question I had for you is basically when it comes to self-assessment. How do people assess whether or not, they may be leaning towards a mental health issue? And I ask that because... I didn't even realize that's something I was ignorant about. And I've never shied away from sharing my experience with depression. Because for me, I saw depression as somebody who was in black clothes, big clothes, just hiding itself in a corner. It's like, okay, I'm functioning as an individual, but you're not seeing. It wasn't until after I was like, whoa, I legit went through a period of depression. That was, back when I was in school, especially, long distancing with my wife and stuff. And I realized, even as you said, I remember I used to binge eat a lot of Chick-fil-A, and I realized that, I went through a serious
depression literally creeps up on you.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you start to feel like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't feel like going anywhere. And there's this decrease in energy. And all of a sudden you want to be alone and you just want to be in your bed and nothing and life is meaningful anymore. You find yourself eating all of these food. You find yourself thinking differently of yourself. Then that means to say, hey, I got to check something here. I'm heading into,
Okay. And another thing I noticed a lot of people share seems to be a much higher level of anxiety. Would you say so? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, you have definitely.
And how do you address?
Okay, so there's all of a sudden there's this fear that comes from nowhere, and so the things that you were accustomed of doing good, you're afraid now to go and catch a bus. You're afraid to take the train to go to school. All of a sudden, it's like everybody is an enemy. And so those are things as well that, this constant palpitation, you feel your heart beating. There's literally like this fear like taking you over. I don't know if you ever experienced it as well. But those are signs as well that something is not right. However, Ralph, in that stage, because acceptance is the first part of therapy. So if you don't accept that something is wrong with you, don't matter how many psychologists you go by, you won't get help. Because it starts with you.
Yeah. And I guess, that touches into being willing to be vulnerable, especially as a man. Yeah.
Willing, and sometimes, our pride could get a better part of us.
True.
But we've lost too many persons because they were afraid to speak out. And sometimes you have speaking to the wrong persons as well. We got to be honest as well. Where confidentiality sometimes in our little community is already so small, but persons got hurt. Where I come and I speak out to you and you took my information and you use it against me, or you told this another person who was your friend and stuff like that. So we have those things too, and we got to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah. It leads to that dysfunction in a society, in families.
In the family.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Because another, so I had another question for you on that, but I think it'll come back around. But so the next thing I would like to touch on then is even that health aspect, because you are someone who speaks a lot about being in good health and so forth, and so you on your own as well, you went and with the knowledge you learned in school, but also that which you learned from your great grandmother and so forth, you opened up Tasheena Health and Wellness Center. So can you share a bit about how that has been, and what are some of the things that you guys offer?
Okay, so Tasheena, we've been open from 2018, and basically, what is Tasheena? Tasheena is basically just a culture package and became a business. That's the easiest way to explain Tasheena. But my journey thus far at Tasheena has been amazing, because I've seen as well where, our people are coming back into this culture, and I'm going to drink my Tasheena, I'm going to detoxify my body and different things like that. So it has been a beautiful thing. But at Tasheena, Ralph, we do everything. When it comes to natural, when it comes to the body, how do I take care of my body? Whether it's detoxing, whether it's food detox, whether it's sauna, whether it's massages, whatever, we are there. We also sit with clients and put together different meal plans as well. Because I don't believe that if you don't like, for instance, quinoa, I don't believe that you should be forcing to eat quinoa. I do believe if you don't like quinoa, okay, let's replace it with something that has the same nutrients, the same vital minerals and stuff like that. So we sit and we, discuss meal plans, but of course, with the liking of the client, what that client like. And that is important, okay? And we also encourage our community to live a healthier lifestyle, of course, by doing certain things. And a lifestyle, of course, living a healthier lifestyle is a choice. But we do, like I said it the night at one of the function that I had, drinking ginger and turmeric and rosemary, piece of onion every day is not going to boost your immune system. Boosting your immune system is a lifestyle. What are you doing to ensure that your health is intact? Are you exercising? Are you eating the right foods? How is your mental state of mind? Because to be healthy means to be well, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, mentally, physically, and socially. And they're all interconnected. So what you notice is that if you're not well in one aspect, you're well in none.
The other suffers.
And I think we need to look into that. When I say that I'm healthy, it does not mean I'm fit, I'm going to the gym, and I'm eating good. But you have suicidal thoughts, for instance. Then you're not healthy because you're not balanced. You're not whole as a person. So we promote that health, but on all aspects. Whether it's spiritual, whatever. We've had some time to pray for some of our clients because we understand that spirituality keeps you grounded.
Yeah.
That may not be for everybody, but that's for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and it helps.
Yeah, and your patients have their testimonies.
Yeah, and I do believe even in my function and what I do in life, I know that it's because of the connection that I have with God that I am thus prepared for the task that is ahead of me. And I'm not bragging or anything because He gets the glory. But my strength comes from the Lord.
And I guess I would like to end on that note because, of course, as you're constantly pouring, helping others, that in itself can be taxing. And it is challenging. You have your own family as well. You know, everyone has their own personality. So
what helps me is that I know exactly when to take when I know exactly when enough is enough, in the sense that I have a great support home. My husband is a wonderful support. I have my children, but I also know that, hey, I need a break now. I need to take a vacation. So what you will see, my vacation is never, I'm going to take a month of vacation. My vacation is always break into a certain
like quarters in the year?
Yes. Why? Because I know definitely because I'm pouring out so much, I need to also rejuvenate and tap into my source.
Yeah, glad you said that. So on that note, I would like to thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. Any final words?
My final words is we can only prosper as a people when we care for each other. Those would be my final words.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So to our viewers and listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I would like to thank you so much for coming on the program, and be sure to tune in again for our next episode. Do take care. Take care. Take care. Take care.